Reports suggest that the New York Mets are gauging the market for Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger. Are they going to go all in on either free agent, and which one is the better fit?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk about Cody Bellinger and Kyle Tucker. In the first segment, I'm going to break down which one is the better player right now. In the second segment, we'll talk about which one contractually will be a better fit for the Mets long term. Final segment, we are going to break down how the Mets roster would change if they can land one of these free agents. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. So Cody Bellinger had his fall off starting in 2021, continuing into 2022. He was then non-tendered by the Dodgers as the former MVP was going to make a lot of money in his final year of arbitration, and he hit the market where he signed a one-year deal with the Cubs for the 2023 season, had an amazing bounce-back year, went to free agency again, signed a 3-year, $80 million deal with opt-outs. After one lackluster season on that deal, the Cubs traded him to the Yankees, and he turned in his best season by WAR since that MVP campaign in 2019, and now is a highly coveted free agent. Meanwhile, Kyle Tucker has been a model of consistency since his first full season in 2021. He is pretty much always a 4 to 5 win player. He has been one of the best corner outfielders in baseball. And when he hit free agency initially, everybody was talking about a $400 million contract for Kyle Tucker. But now that he's been on the market for a while, maybe he could fall to a price range that is a little bit more feasible for the Mets. But let's first and foremost break down which of these guys is a better player and a better fit for the Mets moving forward. Let's start with durability. Over the last 3 years, Cody Bellinger has played 412 games. That's 137 per season. Kyle Tucker has only played 371 games. That's 124 per season. But a lion's share of that missed time came in 2024 when he fractured his shin and was limited to 78 games. In 2025, he had a right hand fracture that he played through for a while, really did hurt him in the middle of the season. They brought up Owen Casey. They rested him up a little bit. He ended up being good to go. Got off to a much better stretch in September. Then he had a little calf injury, which had him out of lineup for a bit, but he was good to go for the playoffs. Ultimately, while there has been some injury concern for Kyle Tucker over the last 2 years, he also, prior to that, had played 150 games in consecutive seasons in 2022 and 2023, and 140 games in 2021, which again was his first full season. I am not too concerned about either of these guys moving forward when it comes to their durability. Both have some injuries in their past. Neither of these guys is just complete, durable, 150 to 160 game players every year, but neither has had debilitating injuries like a bunch of soft muscle injuries and things of that nature where you would think that they're going to age particularly poorly. Kyle Tucker is going to be 29 this upcoming season. I believe he turns 29 in January. Cody Bellinger turned 30 in July, so he still has what is considered his age 30 season coming up, but he'll turn 31 in the middle of the year. He's about a year and a half older than Kyle Tucker. Tucker, not very fast, has never really been his game, yet he's a smart baseball player, has a high IQ, runs the bases well, a good base stealer. He swiped 25 bags this past season. More of a threat there than Bellinger is, although Bellinger can steal the occasional base and does bring more speed to the outfield, where he is a much better fielder than Kyle Tucker. I didn't realize how much of a gap there was between Cody Bellinger and Kyle Tucker until I prepared for today's show. When you talk about outs above average, which is the range-based metric, Cody Bellinger was worth 7 outs above average for the Yankees this past season. Kyle Tucker was worth -2 outs above average for the Cubs. Bellinger in the corner outfield spots when it comes to defensive runs saved, worth 15 defensive runs saved. Kyle Tucker -1. So this past year, Tucker was about replacement level. He's had years in the past where he has been better than that, but Cody Bellinger has the stronger arm. He's quicker in the outfield. He is a better defensive outfielder who also has the ability to come in and play first base. So I think defensively, when we're talking about the Mets and their run prevention and also just their roster flexibility, Cody Bellinger is a much better fit than Kyle Tucker, but also this team needs a big bat to replace Pete Alonso. And Kyle Tucker is the better hitter of these two players. Over the past 3 seasons, if you look at outfielders who have gotten at least 1,000 plate appearances, Kyle Tucker is 4th in Major League Baseball in both WRC plus and OPS. OPS, on base plus slugging. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters on a league average of 100. Aaron Judge is number 1 in both departments. Juan Soto is number 2. Ronald Acuna Jr. is number 3. And then you get to Kyle Tucker at number 4. Bellinger falls a little bit lower down on the list. He's at 17 for WRC plus and 13 for OPS. When it comes to OPS, Kyle Tucker at 892 has nearly an 80-point advantage over Bellinger at 815. WRC plus, Kyle Tucker at 147 is 24% better than Bellinger at a 123 WRC plus over the past 3 seasons. Comes to average, they're very similar hitters. Kyle Tucker, 278 batting average over the last 3 years. Cody Bellinger, 281 batting average. The difference is walk rate. Kyle Tucker has walked at a 14% clip. Bellinger, an 8% clip. That is how you get a big difference in on-base percentage, as Kyle Tucker's OBP has been 380 compared to Cody Bellinger at 338 over those past 3 seasons. When you talk about slugging percentage, Kyle Tucker is one of 5 outfielders who have slugged over 500 over the past 3 seasons. Byron Buxton joins the list that we mentioned before with Judge, Soto, Acuna, and Tucker. When you compare it to Bellinger, Bellinger's slug over the past 3 seasons has been 477. Tucker's 511. Kyle Tucker hits the ball harder, more consistently, but they both get their power the same way. It's pull side pop. That's how they're going to hit their home runs. If we go to expected home runs by park, Cody Bellinger would have hit 25 homers this past season if he played every single game at Citi Field. Kyle Tucker would have hit 26. Bellinger did play more games, though, so you do have to take that into account. Over the past 3 years at Citi Field, Cody Bellinger would have hit 69 homers, which is super nice. Kyle Tucker would have hit 74 homers, again, in less games played. So the power is definitely a little bit better with Kyle Tucker. He's going to walk significantly more, which makes him a more valuable offensive player overall. But neither of these guys is going to strike out much. So you're getting a high contact bat either way. Kyle Tucker is more an average defensive outfielder who in the past has been above average. I still think he can be above average, and I think he has a longer runway in the outfield than Juan Soto, for example. But Cody Bellinger is a plus defensive outfielder. So you're basically weighing between these two players, bat for Tucker or glove for Bellinger, and neither is horrible in the other department. They're both good all-around players, but with Bellinger, you're talking about run prevention. With Tucker, you're talking about a little bit more run production. So, with that said, who's the better player? Ultimately, I still would lean Kyle Tucker, but who's the better fit for the Mets? I think I lean Cody Bellinger. The question then becomes, what's the difference in cost? And spoiler alert, That's probably going to push the Mets even more towards the Cody Bellinger camp. As Kyle Tucker is projected to make a lot of money in free agency. We're going to go through contracts in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting, because you're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift and a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet the next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. That's FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button to help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. Let's talk about contracts for Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger. Projections for Kyle Tucker going into the offseason were that he was going to sign a contract north of $400 million. Everybody looked at Kyle Tucker as soon as Juan Soto signed the $765 million deal with the Mets, because Tucker was next in line. Vladdy signs his contract with the Blue Jays. That was over $500 million. And again, everyone looks at Kyle Tucker because in free agency, if you can get there and your age starts with a 2, not a 3, you stand to make a lot of money, especially if you are the top free agent overall on the board, as Kyle Tucker is. With that said, who is going to give him a $400 million contract? I don't think it's going to be the Mets. The Blue Jays reportedly are thinking about the $400 million and could go there. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like $400 million is on the table. Is this just a situation where the Blue Jays don't want to bet against themselves, or bid against themselves? I should say, not bet against themselves, but they don't want to be just the only team in that's just driving up the price on a free agent that nobody else is considering this level of a long-term commitment for. Is there more interest than we know coming from the Yankees or some other team outside of the Blue Jays or the Mets? It's a really tough one to peg. It seems like the Cubs are clearly just ready to move on from Kyle Tucker. It was a 1-year rental. It worked in the beginning of the year, and then they didn't have the playoff success that they wanted, and now they got Owen Casey, and they're just good to go. Seems like they're out of it, and it doesn't really seem like there's another fit. So what I think could happen here is maybe the Blue Jays are not diving all in on Kyle Tucker, and who knows? Maybe they decide, you know what? We'll just bring back Bo Bichette. And if that were to happen, which I don't know if Bichette would really get done before Tucker, it seems like Tucker is the big piece that's clogging the market. When it comes to the report that I mentioned in the cold open today, it was Mark Feinsand on Hot Stove for MLB Network who made the comment that the Mets are, looking at Kyle Tucker and very in on Cody Bellinger. To me, there would have to be a very specific set of circumstances where Kyle Tucker falls to the Mets. Either the long-term deal that he has been seeking is not out there from another team, and the Mets can swoop in and they can sign Kyle Tucker at more like $30 million per instead of $40 million per, if it's that super long 10-year type deal. But I just don't know if it makes that much sense when you finally just got off of your long-term commitments. You have been staring down the barrel of whether or not to give Pete Alonso the long-term deal for 3 years now. That decision has come to pass. You moved off of Brandon Nimmo. You now have all of this future financial flexibility. Are you really then going to say, you know what this team really needs is another decade-long contract? I just don't see it. So if Kyle Tucker falls to the Mets, to me, the more likely outcome is that it is a short-term, ridiculously high AAV contract where the Mets say, you know what, Kyle Tucker is the best player. Maybe Cody Bellinger gets the 6-year deal from the Yankees or is getting that level of commitment, the Mets maybe don't want to go there on Bellinger either. And they throw 3 years and $150 million at Kyle Tucker with some opt-outs and say, hey, you basically get a better version of the Alex Bregman contract from last year, where Bregman got 4 for 120, but there was a bunch of deferrals that took it down to more like $30 million per. Maybe this is a situation where there's not even deferrals, where it's just, hey, here's 2 for 100. Get $50 million a year, come play left or right field for us, and then you can hit free agency once the new CBA has been ratified next year. Maybe that's the deal. Maybe it's $50 million year one, $45 million year two, $40 million year three, and it's 3 for 135. There's a lot of ways that a short-term high AAV contract can be structured, where the New York Mets are getting the best player available, but they're not tied to him long-term, and they are just basically blowing out their payroll for the upcoming season, which kind of flies in the face of everything they've done up to this point in the offseason. But when you look at the Jorge Polanco contract, it was sort of a similar thought process on a much lower scale, where it was, okay, we want Jorge Polanco. We see him as the best bat that we can add right now at the first base DH position that's realistic. The Mets are keeping their tabs in everybody's market, and they probably knew that Jorge Polanco was coming closer to a decision. Seemed like he really wanted to return to the Mariners, and the Mets just threw $20 million a year at him and were able to just buy him away from Seattle. That's why the AAV got so high. My assumption is that maybe the Mariners would have given him a 3-year deal at a much lower average annual value, or maybe the money would have been almost similar to what he gets on a 2-year. But the Mets keep their long-term books clean. They only commit 2 years to Jorge Polanco, but they pay more in terms of average annual value than anybody was expecting. You could see a similar strategy with Kyle Tucker. I just can't see them going the distance on a Kyle Tucker mega contract. And we'll see. If I'm wrong, I'll wear it. It just doesn't line up with what they've done this offseason, which then begs the question, how far are they willing to go on Cody Bellinger? Is Bellinger the exception to the 3-year window they're trying to sign free agents in? Is he the guy that they say, you know what, fine, we'll go to 6 years? I still don't think so. I still don't think that if Bellinger has a 6-year offer on the table at a reasonable salary, I don't think it's with the Mets. I really don't. 5 years, I can start to talk myself into it, and I would say his positional versatility and just the fact that athletically it seems like he's going to be able to hold his own in a corner outfield spot and be above average for some time, and probably would be fine out there for the entirety of a 5-year deal. Just at the end, he might not be plus in the outfield. But if in 4 years Juan Soto's a first baseman or a DH, well, then you can have Cody Bellinger in left field, and maybe Carson Bench is playing right and AJ Ewing's in center, and that's your team. Who knows? I can see the Mets maybe going to 5. More likely, though, I think it's higher AAV, shorter term. So maybe the Mets are the team that gives Cody Bellinger $35 million per to get him on a shorter term deal. Maybe they go to $30 million for 4 years or even 5. I just don't know what team is going to give Cody Bellinger the $30 million if it's not the Mets. If the Yankees aren't going to get there, then who are the other teams that are in? All we've really been hearing is Yankees or Mets for Cody Bellinger. So once again, you have a Yankees outfielder that these two teams are fighting over, and we'll see if, just like last year, the Mets win the bidding war. The one thing that just is stopping me from saying, oh, Bellinger's a Met, is because the Mets have not put an offer on the table for any free agent beyond 3 years. And I imagine part of that is the CBA stuff, where the Mets don't know what it's going to look like to be a luxury tax team in a new CBA, and they're trying to keep their powder dry just in case it's an impossible roster to have Bellinger, Soto, Lindor all signed to these long-term deals. Not to mention, you have Marcus Semien, who's going to be making a good amount of money still the next couple of years. Sean Manaea still has another year after this one where he's making a decent chunk of change. So, Devin Williams is making a good amount of money. So It's just a tough thing to gauge. How will the Mets spend? Are they willing to go in on either of these guys? To me, Cody Bellinger makes a lot more sense for the New York Mets because he's a better defender. You want to get better at run prevention, and you aren't paying a premium because he's 29 years old. He's 30, and yes, he's coming off a good season, but I don't think anyone believes that Cody Bellinger is going to sniff $200 million, whereas there's still some that think that Kyle Tucker is going to clear 400. So when you actually compare the price tags, to me, I don't think there's really any sort of debate on who's the better fit for the Mets. Ultimately, I think it's Cody Bellinger. When you talk about what this team needs with run prevention in mind, but also just the fact that they have been so hesitant to give out long-term commitments. Are they going to give the longest term deal for this free agent class and Kyle Tucker after not wanting to go beyond 3 years for Edwin Diaz or Pete Alonso, not wanting to sign a free agent starting pitcher if it's a longer term deal? Just that hesitance makes me think Bellinger's the guy. Now, if he is the guy, how does this team fit together in 2026? Is he the perfect fit? We're going to close there in just a minute. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everyday Club today and get Locked On Mets with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to lockedonmets.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. Now, if the Mets were to sign Cody Bellinger, and it was up to me, I'd be telling Juan Soto to play some left field. I would say, that's your spot. You're our left fielder for the next decade, Juan, even though you're thinking in the back of your mind, you're our left fielder for the next 3 years, and then we're really going to try to get you to play first base or DH to get you out of the outfield, but you want to play in the outfield. That's your spot. His arm's going to play better out there. It's less ground for him to cover, and Cody Bellinger should be your right fielder. Carson Benz, you hope, is your center fielder, but if he's not ready, you do have the option to move Bellinger into center field. Personally, I'm playing Tyrone Taylor, and I'm having Bellinger in right. Now, there's a caveat to that, and that is if Jeff McNeil is still on your roster, then he could be your stopgap at a corner, and you could move Bellinger to center. The problem with that, Cody Bellinger was below average defensively in center field this past season, has not been a consistent center fielder since 2023. So I'd rather not run him into the ground in center and play him where he is an elite defender in a corner spot. With that said, if you're mixing and matching and you're having Bellinger start in center field some days when Jeff McNeil is playing in right, you got Tyrone Taylor who'll go out there and play center in the middle of the game. You can always put Tyrone Taylor out in center field and move Bellinger back over to right. If Luis Angel Acuna's on your roster and you want to give him some playing time in center field, you can really make the outfield a flexible situation where you're moving Bellinger back and forth and you're supplementing him with a combination of different guys while Juan Soto is the one constant playing every inning and left. If you were to keep McNeil and sign Bellinger, you have so much versatility and flexibility on this roster. Now, keeping McNeil's a little bit weird at this point because you have just done so much to tear up that old core. The fact that Jeff McNeil is just going to be hanging out for another year is a little bit strange. But if you remove the past and the perceived notion of Jeff McNeil being a bad clubhouse guy, but also just the fact that he is tied to this core that you just blew up and you just focus on the player, there are a few guys in free agency that would be the type of utility man for the Mets that Jeff McNeil could be off of the bench. So I'm not entirely convinced they will move him. The Athletic has reported the Mets are not going to just move Kodai Senga or Jeff McNeil or David Peterson for the sake of moving them. They will only move them if they're getting something of value in return. And I also don't know if you're going to get much of value in return for Jeff McNeil. So I think if you're keeping McNeil and you sign Bellinger, well, now you got coverage all over the place because you have so many different ways that this team can be adjusted throughout the season. Let's just say A.J. Ewing has another outstanding year. He tears the cover off the ball in AA, gets up to AAA, and by July, A.J. Ewing is your center fielder of the future. You see it. He took another leap. He's your guy. Well, now you could have A.J. Ewing in center. You could slide bench to right, and you could take Cody Bellinger, put him at first base, where he's probably going to be your best defensive option. That's one way that you can go about it. Let's say you have a roster where Jorge Polanco and Mark Vientos are splitting first base and DH at the beginning of the season, and Mark Vientos just is not hitting well and not playing a good first base, and neither is Polanco. Well, now, if you want to keep Bellinger's glove in the outfield, you can stick Jeff McNeil at first base and buy time for Ryan Clifford, who could be waiting in the wings in AAA. And if Clifford can eventually come up, be your first baseman, you push McNeil back to the bench. You never even have to worry about Cody Bellinger coming in, where, yes, he can play first base, but I think his value is really tied to the ability to be an elite corner outfielder, not just a good defensive first baseman. I think you really sort of hurt what he can bring to the table if you have to move him in. I think Jeff McNeil allows you to keep him in the outfield, because while McNeil could always play right and you'd have a more natural first baseman in the infield, you'd rather have Bellinger in the outfield than Jeff McNeil. And I feel like the gap between McNeil and Bellinger at first base is not worth the difference in that gap in the outfield. So again, this is a way where your team is just versatile all over the place. Jorge Polanco can be your second baseman if Marcus Semien goes down. Jorge Polanco can be your third baseman if Brett Beatty's not getting the job done. You just have so many different options defensively, and that feels like a David Stearns team. That's why Cody Bellinger really is the ideal fit at this point in free agency. He's the best player I think that they could add on the market, unless you're going to the trade market. And I've already talked about Jarren Duran enough on this show, but he's the other guy to me that makes a lot of sense to make this team better defensively, as well as adding a bat that can slot near the top of your lineup. When it comes to that, how does the lineup look if you sign Cody Bellinger? Last year, Cody Bellinger was Aaron Judge's protection in the lineup. So I think there's every chance that Cody Bellinger would provide the same for Juan Soto. While he's left-handed, both Juan Soto and Cody Bellinger are good left on left. For Bellinger, he had reverse splits last year. He was better against lefties than against righties. So I think your 1 through 3 very well could be Lindor, Soto, Bellinger. Jorge Polanco could bat cleanup. Regardless of the order, those are supposed to be, if you were to sign Bellinger, your top 4 hitters. And you would hope that, hey, maybe you get a breakout from Francisco Alvarez. Maybe Mark Vientos rediscovers 2024 Vientos. Maybe Brett Beatty has continued progression. But you have 4 established veterans atop that lineup that you are hoping to get a lot of that production from. And then you get towards the middle of the lineup, and that's where you get to the unknowns, but guys that you hope can give you some upside, whether it is a Vientos, a Beatty, and Alvarez, whether it's Ronnie Mauricio, who likely starts the season waiting in the wings in AAA, or Ryan Clifford, or Jet Williams, or A.J. Ewing. A lot of options, not to mention Nick Morabito, who was added to the 40. If you go and you sort of look at position by position, how things shape up, at first base and DH, I really do think you go into the year with Polanco and Vientos, and whoever's better defensively is the guy. The other one's the DH. Ronnie Mauricio, theoretically, you could play around Mauricio, and hey, let's see if Mauricio can add versatility and play in the outfield, and let's keep playing him at shortstop, at second base. To me, for Mauricio this upcoming season, it should be third base almost all the time, because he's your insurance policy if Brett Beatty regresses. And I would also give him a first baseman and just see what that looks like. Ryan Clifford, he is potentially your first baseman of the future waiting in the wings in AAA. So I think the Mets not going out and getting another first base DH type actually makes sense, but only if you were able to land a top tier outfielder to complete this lineup, whether that is Bellinger, Tucker, or Jarren Duran. If it's Luis Robert, I then want the Mets to probably get another bat to cycle into the DH or the first base position, because I don't trust that Robert's going to be able to hit. I trust that he's going to be a good defensive center fielder, but I really don't know what the Mets would be getting offensively. So that's where, personally, with the way this offseason has gone, the fact that you don't have Pete Alonso hitting 40 and 100 in the middle of your lineup, I'd be more hesitant at this point than ever to make that trade for Luis Robert and just completely bank on a bounce back that may never come. But if your team going into the season has a starting lineup that looks something like this, where it's Lindor, obviously shortstop batting leadoff, Soto in left batting second, Bellinger playing right batting third, Jorge Polanco is your first baseman, Mark Vientos is your DH, Brett Beatty's at third, you got Alvarez at catcher, Carson Benj is your center fielder, and Marcus Semien is your second baseman. 1 through 9, that is a deep lineup. That's a lineup that can pick it, that can put up runs, and your bench, I think, has improved as well. It would keep Jeff McNeil as the first bat off your bench. You got Tyrone Taylor as your defensive specialist in the outfield. You got Luis Angel Acuna as your defensive specialist in the infield. And you got Luis Torrens as your backup catcher with AAA depth of Ronnie Mauricio, Nick Morabito, Ryan Clifford, Jet Williams, and AJ Ewing. Of course, that's assuming not making trades, which very well could thin out that depth in a lot of different ways. But that's a good team. Essentially, you're taking last year's Mets, and you have replaced Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo with Marcus Semien, Jorge Polanco, and Cody Bellinger. You then would push Jeff McNeil out of the starting lineup to the bench. That means second base got better defensively, and offensively, we'll see if Semien can have a little bit of a resurgence. Your bench gets a lot better because McNeil's on it when he was in the starting lineup last year. Your outfield, I think, gets an upgrade, certainly defensively with Bellinger over Nimmo, maybe even slightly offensively with Bellinger over Nimmo, although I think that that's a little bit of a marginal upgrade at best. First base, you're taking a step back offensively, obviously, with Polanco compared to Pete Alonso, but you're hoping that you've made up enough when it comes to overall depth of your roster, defensive versatility, run prevention, that you can account for that loss of production. And a big part of it, and we'll go a long way to get you there, is having, whether it is Mark Vientos bouncing back, whether it is Brett Beatty building off of his breakout, or Francisco Alvarez repeating what he did down the stretch in the second half after his AAA demotion. If those guys can sort of bridge that gap a little bit, they can all improve. I think you can account for that loss of offensive production and ultimately field the team that altogether would be better than the 2025 New York Mets. Obviously, it's hard to be worse than the way that team finished, but it wasn't really the position players at the end of the day that were the problem. It was the pitching side of things. So I think you need to help the pitchers with run prevention and get that offense as close to as good as it was when you had all those guys firing on all cylinders at certain points last season with Lindor, Soto, and Alonso, and to a certain extent, Brandon Nimmo. Anyway, that is going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Really do appreciate all of you for tuning in. I still want to do a show coming up here about Nolan McLean, so expect that coming probably tomorrow, barring any news that we might get. And also, I still have a contract idea for Framber Valdez that I think is intriguing. So expect those shows coming up soon here. Again, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider or join the Everydayer Club, you can find a link in the episode description. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.